أهلا وسهلا بالزملاء زميلات اللي معانا هنا في
here in this hall and ARIJ forum and the colleagues who have joined us on the virtual world. I'm Huda Uthman and I'm member of the editorial team in ARIJ, and we'll start our session now. We have Len Kessler from Washington Post. Please, I'm going to speak in English because this is easier for translators who needs translation for Arabic language. Please get your devices. The session will be conducted in English.
Glenn, welcome. Welcome to ARIJ and welcome to Amman. We're all very excited about this session, especially today. Becomes increasingly important, to fact check everything, and there's more and more interest in this subject. Glenn Kessler is the editor and the chief writer of the Fact Checker at the Washington Post since 2011. This makes him the longest serving manager of a fact-checking operation in the world. He has also covered economic policy, foreign policy, the White House, Congress, airplane safety, and Wall Street. He was also the chief State Department reporter for the Washington Post for 9 years. And before that, he's covered taxes and budget policy. He's also written 2 books, and I need my glasses for this one. Glenn wrote 2 books, Donald Trump and His Assault on Truth, The President's Falsehoods, Misleading Claims, and Flat-Out Lies, and another book, The Confidant, Condoleezza Rice and the Creation of the Bush Legacy. Glenn, welcome very much. We welcome you here at ARIJ and Amman.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the Washington Post fact checker focuses mostly on political claims. We vet the accuracy of statements made by American politicians as well as foreign officials, and we rate those claims on a sliding scale of Pinocchios. So it's kind of like a reverse restaurant review. If you've told a complete lie, you don't get 4 stars, you get 4 Pinocchios. And then it goes down, 2 Pinocchios would be kind of half true. 1 Pinocchio, it's mildly untrue. We also have something called the Geppetto check mark, which I reserve for statements that are unexpectedly true, where you think that maybe it sounds like it's wrong, but it turns out to be right. And during the presidency of Donald Trump, we also documented every false and misleading claim that he made as president, which added up to almost 30,000 false or misleading claims. But I was, on occasion, because I used to cover diplomacy, I will also vet statements made by foreign officials. So I thought I would share, given the audience, I would share some details about 2 fact checks I did concerning the state of Israel. One was in 2018 when Bibi Netanyahu, then the prime minister, I guess now he's going to be the prime minister again, had said that the Palestinian Authority pays $350 million a year to, quote, terrorists and their families, end quote. Now, this was an important issue because at the time there was a bill pending in Congress that would have cut off funding to the Palestinian Authority if the payments were not halted. And the State Department already had deducted from the Palestinian aid budget a figure that supposedly matched the level of these payments. But that figure was classified. So this seemed like a very ripe issue for fact-checking, as neither the Israelis or the Palestinians, for political reasons, really wanted to reveal the real number. Israel prefers to use broad numbers labeling every Palestinian in custody as a quote-unquote terrorist to avoid a spotlight on its detention practices. And the Palestinians did not really want to single out a clear-cut case of terrorism, as even family members of of those people would believe that this was a necessary necessary resistance to occupation. Because from the Palestinian perspective, these are payments to Palestinian prisoners, martyrs, and the injured. The Israelis said all were terrorists. So I sought to figure out whether Netanyahu's number of $350 million a year was exaggerated. So I relied on a variety of sources. I spoke to people in the State Department on a very confidential basis who guided me as I came back to them with information. I went to the Palestinian Liberation Organization using contacts that I had developed over the years, and I convinced the PLO to share with me documents they had not given to any other reporter. I also dug deeply into the basis of the Israeli claims and where the Israelis were getting these numbers. Now, the Palestinians said that the payments were intended to balance an unfair system imposed by an occupying power, as the Israelis use a military court system that quickly convicts the accused. But they also acknowledged to me that some payments were made to the families of suicide bombers. And this system was not inexpensive. I calculated that the payments at the time, I don't know what it is now, accounted for 2.5% of the Palestinians' gross domestic product, while providing benefits to just about 1 to 2% of all Palestinians. And then I actually discovered something that had eluded even the Israelis. Because while the prisoner payments are openly listed in the Palestinian budget, there was another $10 million in payments that were hidden. These were payments to about 700 Palestinian members of security forces who were in Israeli prisons. And they continued to receive their salaries with regular promotions as if they were still serving on the security forces, but these numbers had been hidden in the Palestinian security budget. So after a number of weeks, or maybe a couple months of doing this, I ultimately calculated that at least $60 million a year, maybe as much as $100 million a year, went to people convicted of clear acts of terrorism. That was much lower than Netanyahu's $350 million. So I awarded him 2 Pinocchios, essentially half true. I later learned that the Israeli government complained officially to the US government and to the Washington Post about my article. And the law ultimately was passed, notwithstanding my effort to add some clarity and context to the discussion. The other article I wrote that might be of interest, this is when Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif said that Israel had acquired 400 nuclear warheads in violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And a large part of what I try to do with the fact checker is educate people about complex policy issues. It's like the quotes are a vehicle to dig deeply into a subject. So this seemed like a good mechanism to explore both whether this 400 figure was correct, but also to document how Israel had secretly acquired nuclear weapons in defiance of the international community, much like Iran was accused of doing. Israel's nuclear deceit was a story that did not get much attention in the US media, and I thought that many of the Washington Post readers would not be fully aware of it. So it was an opportunity for me to document that history. For instance, when Israel was secretly building its weapons, requested inspections by US experts were cursory and often postponed. Israel refused to accept visits from the International Atomic Energy Agency, and later it was learned that the Israelis had built fake walls around the elevators that led to underground nuclear reprocessing plant and facilities. So they completely fooled the Americans when they were trying to inspect the facilities. I also wrote that both the Carter and Reagan administrations ignored or played down intelligence information pointing to Israel being involved in what was believed to be a secret nuclear test off the coast of South Africa in 1979. Now, determining how many nuclear weapons Israel might have is a little more difficult. Again, secret numbers, not everything disclosed. And certainly the Israelis have never officially acknowledged they have nuclear weapons. So I consulted with various experts about the latest and most reliable estimates at the time, and the consensus was about 100 weapons, not 400. So this was significantly less than what Zarif had claimed, and I gave him 2 Pinocchios. Now the funny thing is that after the article was published, I received an email from Zarif. And he wrote to me that while he greatly appreciated my history of Israel's nuclear program, he had closely read the explanation of the Pinocchio scale and did not believe he deserved 2 Pinocchios. Anyway, so the articles can be found. I mean, you can just Google them and see the whole thing. The one on the Palestinian Authority payments is a rather lengthy article.
Thank you so much, Glenn. Thank you for the 2 examples. You can find the fact checker on the Washington Post's website, and on there you will find these 2 articles, as well as many others. You can also sign up for the newsletter. So we're ready to take some questions from people here in the room, as well as also anyone who's attending virtually. Maybe, Glenn, I can start off by asking you to give us some of your top tools, like when you're fact-checking some of these stories. How do you get started, and what are some of the top tools that you use?
Well, the first thing I do when I hear a statement that I think seems somewhat suspect, I put it into Google. I do a Google search. Where did that possibly come from? I mean, the best thing to fact-check is obviously a number. And particularly if a politician or an official uses a specific number, you will find that a Google search might turn up the report that that number was based on. Or, I mean, I find particularly in the United States, the right wing of the United States, they kind of have their own information sphere. And if a politician might say something that it's like a strange statistic about how many immigrants are crossing the border or something like that, a Google search might turn up, oh, this came from this kind of sketchy right-wing website, and that's why they're using this number. I've covered many different issues over the years in Washington, so I have many resources and experts that I can draw on. I know where to find particular documents. So once I know in the sphere that I'm working in, I can then try to tap those different sources. Of course, I will also eventually go to the person who made the statement to kind of get their explanation or their counter to what I have found. But the resources that are available, at least for me in the United States, are quite extensive. And I should note that I'm having sat here in the audience and listened to these presentations and to see the amazing work that so many of you have done, that for me in the United States, I'm a bit in a privileged position with the access to information that we have. And I also work for the Washington Post, which means that people, when I call them or I contact them, they often get back to me. These Pinocchios engender a lot of anxiety in American political circles. So, I have certain access and tools that I readily admit would not be available to me if I were, living in Cairo or if I were living in Ramallah or something like that.
Any questions from anyone here or virtually? Feel free to come to the mic.
I think he was.
مساء الخير. أنا خلود العامري من العراق.
My name is Khulud Al-Amari from Iraq. We have a website in Iraq. We have Facebook pages and social media, which is our main website. always we try to check the information and to audit them, especially some news.
بالأخبار المزيفة.
We are in a country where I have many forged, misleading news or things that are not really checked. I have a question. But usually in Iraq, let's say, news are spread fast without checking them. Then someone would come, check the news. After checking it, when they publish it, then it will not receive enough interest by the public. So I saw the forged or the misleading news. When they correct it and they show me the misleading things and proving that this is misleading and the accurate part is this way, it will not receive the same interest as it received when it was misleading. What can we do to increase the knowledge of audience over the social media, their knowledge over, of the news after checking it? Thank you.
I'm going to translate this, but I think it's better to get the
Actually, it's right there. Yeah. I'm sorry, I left it on my.
I'll translate this one, but then for the next one, it's good to have the mic. Khulud Al-Amiri from Iraq, she said that they do have a similar fact-checking operation on social media. They have a page on Facebook. But what she noticed is that even though there's a lot of fake news spreading around, the interest in the original news, which is fake, is usually, large. There's a lot of interest in it. But then when there is fact-checking and correction of the news, there isn't as much interest by people, and she's asking you, do you have any solutions or suggestions on how to deal with that?
Well, that's a great question. It's a very difficult subject. Part of the problem is there's a lot of social science research that shows that people are receptive to things that confirm what they already believe. This is a constant problem we face with fact-checking, because so that original post that got so many likes or views, people grabbed onto it because it confirmed something that they were already thinking about. So they don't want to hear that, oh, that thing that I liked so much or that resonated with me was wrong. And in theory, under the Facebook program, Facebook, puts those things lower down and it's more difficult to access, but the damage is already done. I feel like it's a constant process of education, and it's education of, when I say education, it's not just making sure that we are always fact-checking things and debunking them, but also training people to be better consumers of information. It actually starts, with our children and making them skeptical of things and make them understand that they have to, before they embrace something, that they have to be, explore what it came from before they share it. So that's the long-term solution. I'm not quite sure what the immediate solution is.
Thank you, Glenn. Go ahead, please.
مساء الخير، أنا مدققة حقائق من فلسطين.
Good evening. I'm a fact checker from Palestine. I'm referring to the first example that you mentioned about the Palestinians and the payments that were used to be paid. What is your approach that you follow in deciding if they are prisoners or terrorists or convicted as terrorists? Because do you follow the government or the international humanitarian law? As for the American government, the Palestinian prisoners are convicted for terrorist acts, but as for IHL and UN, they are prisoners. So in fact-checking, did you follow the government policy, not the international humanitarian law, or not? And here, maybe this is a trap for fact-checkers. Am I in Palestine fact-checking based on my government views or according to the just international humanitarian law? And now, if I check facts in the war or any information about Ukraine and Russia, am I going to select or follow the policy of any of these governments based on their policies, or shall I base my views based on neutral and international humanitarian law and checking the facts between the two countries? Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I mean, you can't rely. Well, certainly in the case of the Palestinian issue, you cannot rely on Israeli government definitions. Let's see, the way I cited a number of NGOs, Palestinian NGOs. So one that I referred to was, it's Adamir, I don't know if I'm saying it right, which took the number of prisoners who were convicted of terrorism serving a life sentence. That was a small, very, very small number, but a number of these cases, when I looked into them, they were pretty clear cases of someone who, for instance, here, this is an example, Hakim Awad, who was 18 years old, who murdered five family members in a West Bank settlement. Now, and he received a life sentence. So that's kind of the parsing that I did. I mean, you can't necessarily, you should definitely go by international definitions and not by state definitions, but in particular, it makes sense to look at the individual cases and understand what went on there. Because, obviously, particularly in the Israeli-Palestinian issue, the views of what these people are how do I put it? I don't want to use a cliche, but the perspective of whether or not that person is a terrorist or not really depends on where you're looking at it from. And the problem with the Israelis is they take this broad brush that every single person is a terrorist, even if it's a child that was throwing a stone. And like as I document in the article, they don't want to get into definitions or talk in detail about it because the problem is their military court system and their detention system is so oppressive to the Palestinians that the more they talk about it, the more that it's exposed.
Abdullah from Sadiq, Yemen. So I'll speak in English.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So when we search online on how to fact check, we find a lot of resources, but we find nothing when we search about what to fact check. So I wonder if you have, from your experience, some tips on what to fact check, because we see a lot of disinformation every day, and sometimes we cannot take a decision on what to choose first to fact check. So is there a specific methodology that you use in Washington Post? Thank you.
Right, that's a good question. I mean, what I look for is, first of all, you don't want to fact check, is the sky blue? Something like that, right? And you don't want to fact check something that is obviously true. You want to be able to educate people about things that are happening in their world so that they have a better understanding of that. So I always look for a statement that will allow me to write more deeply about complex policy issues. If it's foreign policy or healthcare policy, tax policy, something like that. So because I find that the more difficult and complex a subject is, the more susceptible it is to misinformation. So it's a way to educate people. The idea is that the fact check might be able to, it's not just in the moment, but it could last for a long time. I get tens of thousands of Google hits searches a day from people reading old fact checks because they're looking for information. The other thing I try to look for is, is the person who is saying it a powerful person who is in the news and should be fact checked? This year, the person who I fact checked most on an individual basis was President Joe Biden. He's the President of the United States. He says lots of things that are not correct. So that's a good reason to, put him under scrutiny. And then it also is like, is the subject currently in the news? In the United States, we often have lots of gun violence and lots of mass shootings that kill lots of people. That's a moment when I do a lot of gun fact checks because people are interested in guns at that moment. So that's kind of like the basic criteria I have for looking for things, to look for. I mean, is it viral? Is it something that people are talking about? But at its core, it really should be about something that is important, like a deeper subject.
Okay, we'll take one more question from the speaker here, and then we'll take another question here.
Nabil Audi, I'm from TRT, and also I'm doing my PhD in digital sociology. Actually, Huda asked you, Glenn, that what tools that you are using in your work. But as I understood that you answered about the methods here. You have access, you can Google, your privilege, position in Washington Post that maybe we miss something like that, especially in the Arab world. So my question about if there are like a digital enabled tools that you use in order to make your work more solid. This is the first thing. The second thing, actually, we are talking about fact checking, but this is something about related to like isolated information or data or something like that. But we need to go beyond that and think about check fact narrative, which talking about interconnected stories, which actually could be like completely false and affect, the international, the public opinion. And the last thing, for example, in US, it's somehow a pluralized society. Do you think that fact-checking in this way could help bringing, the different narrative closer, or it could actually help for making the society more pluralized? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Your first question, I lost your
the tools, I think he wants to more specifically, digital tools that you might use to fact check.
Yeah, digital enabled tools that you can use, in your work.
Yeah. Digital tools. I don't do. Yeah, I don't. I'm just one of those. I'm still kind of stuck in the pen and paper world. There are for a while there. I had a whole video team, and they became so good. They became the core of the Washington Post forensics team, and they actually did an
investigation on the Shireen Abu Akleh. It was one of the very good ones that were done about it, and it won awards too.
Yeah, from your organization. But the people that did that worked for me, used to. But that, like I said, they got too good for me. In terms of your second question, in the last year, I have tried to kind of alter the fact check format a bit, so that I'm not just examining a specific claim, but I'm telling us, I'm looking deep into the development of misinformation and false information. Because in some ways I feel like the individual fact check is not necessarily enough in this era. And so, as an example, there was a thing that went wild in the United States, particularly, and was mentioned in Congress, and it went rather viral, and that was about that athletes were dropping dead on the field because of the COVID vaccine. And completely false, but there was a list circulating on the web of like 900 athletes from around the world who had simply dropped dead because of the COVID vaccine. So I traced that. I wrote, rather than just do a fact check and say this is wrong, I traced how that had developed. And I found that it had its roots in fake websites set up by the far-right party of Austria. And then it went into and I traced it from those fake reports, and then how it crossed the Atlantic and went into right-wing websites and then into the mouths of senators. So in some ways, there was a more effective way to look at that than just simply saying, this is false.
That's a very important point. I know we're out of time, but I'd like to we got one question on paper,
okay.
Pen and paper, the old way. So I'd like to ask you this question quickly, and then we'll get on. I'd like to ask everyone to stay in the room because I have some important reminders and things about tonight to tell you. Being in American media, between quotations, what is your best strategy to enhance your credibility in the Middle East, and how can you sustain the lobbying from pressure groups?
It was enhance my credibility? Oh, my credibility, okay, yeah. Well, best strategy, you have to, the key thing is to, I think because of the 9 years I spent as a diplomatic correspondent, I did develop a reputation as someone who was, completely, straight on the issues and wrote about things in detail with accuracy. I mean, that's the best you can do. You have to be, and you cannot be worried about who you offend as long as you are making clear that what you are writing or broadcasting is the truth. The Middle East is tough territory. There are people that get very angry, these are conflicts and issues that have gone on for many, many years. And there was one piece I did, I guess I could have mentioned it as well. I did a piece just on, the two narratives on the creation of Palestine. Because there's an Israeli narrative that says it was just, invented, it was part of a tourism thing and that never really existed. And then I showed, the going back in history, how you could, if you look at, there was a Roman province that had, the name of Palestine. So that kind of divide is virtually impossible to marry. So the important thing is just to show that you are treating all these subjects fairly and without favor.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Glenn, thank you for coming today and for this important session.